Have you ever heard of Juz'un la yatajazza? It's basically the idea of the building blocks of life. You could say the atoms, except it's more related to philosophy than to science. It's basically like the concept of the atom before we were able to like look at and study and the atom with all the scientific equipment. And it was basically a debate between the philosophers, the falasifa, and the mutakallimin, who are, you say, the Muslims, the scholars of Islam, debating about like the mutakallimin would are the people who used like the Ash'ari and Maturidiyya. They used to try and use aqli dalail, or what you could say logical arguments. They used to use debate and logical arguments against the philosophers to try and disprove them and say that Islam is correct and true logically as well as nassan, as well as according to textual evidences. The Ahlul Hadith, they used to say, no, we don't do any logical argumentation. We accept the Hadith and Quran as true, and anything that is that like logical argumentation against it, we just ignore it. Which, to be fair, is a. I'll go into that at a later point. For now, let's focus on this. The Mutakallimin used to use logical argumentation, and one of the things they used was to discuss. The Falasifa used to deny. They used to deny the starting of the universe. They used to say that the universe is qadim, it is ever existing, and they had a lot of weird beliefs as well. The way that they even integrated the belief in Allah was also ajib. It was a strange thing that they tried to balance like ancient Greece philosophical ideas of the start of the universe or of the existence of the universe with Allah. It's a completely like heretical beliefs. Anyway, so the Mutakallimin used to argue for a thing called Juz'un la yatajazza. They used to say that the whole world is created by out of the or composed of Juz'un la yatajazza, the atom, the tiniest fragment of reality, which Allah initially created. And Juz'un la yatajazza, it literally translates to a piece which cannot be divided. Or it roughly translates to a piece that cannot be divided. So the literal building blocks, conceptually, it has to be. And they used to argue for the existence of this thing, because then they would say that this has to be, logically speaking, this has to exist. This has to be real. And then the fact that this is real proves that the world is not qadim, that it's not infinite. And that was the way, and so there's a whole debate on this now, whether this is real or it's not real. So the Mutakallimin used to use the example, for example, they say, all right, look, a rock and a mountain. A rock has, let's say you divide it, you break it, until eventually you get to a point where you can't break it anymore. That's like the actual building blocks of reality, of matter. And that building block, you will be able to count it and say, okay, 50,000 Juz'un la yatajazza equals one rock. I'm just using 50,000 as a placeholder. And a mountain, you'll break it down, and eventually once you get to the Juz'un la yatajazza, you'll say, okay, 500,000 Juz'un la yatajazza equals one mountain. So you'll have a concept of reality where of measurement of reality. And the philosophers, and the argument against that was that the philosophers initially believed that Juz'un la yatajazza doesn't exist. If you keep on dividing, you'll always be able to continue dividing ad infinitum, and eventually, and that's why they say that the world is infinite, because you can infinitely keep on dividing it, and so this division would never end, and the world, like nothing can be, matter cannot be destroyed or ended. It would just continuously divide infinitely. So they believed in the infinity of matter, and and through that they used to try and prove that the world is thus infinite, time-wise, as a qadim, going backwards, not going forwards. Going forwards, I can't even remember. They might have believed that like Allah could end the world, but anyway, that's a different topic. So the arguments for now Juz'un la yatajazza, that was one that I just mentioned. But then the philosophers, they would argue, okay, Juz'un la yatajazza, that means that's something that cannot be divided. It cannot have, and the Mutakallimin also admitted that it can't have tul, urd, or umuq, which is length, width, and depth. Because if something has that has then it's a jism, it's a body, and it can be divided. Like you at any the argument that it can be divided, the philosophers would say if you put one juzun la yatajazza next to another juzun la yatajazza, all right, one is on the right, one is on the left, and that proves that it has a right and a left. And the fact that it does have a right and a left means that you can separate the right from the left. You can like conceptually separate it, which means that it's not la yatajazza. And so there's a whole debate on this, and there's scholars that went back and forth. Imam Razi, for example, he discusses it a lot. He makes tawaqquf. He says the Imam Nasafi rahmatullahi in Sharh Aqidah, he also discusses it. Imam Taftazani gives in his Sharh, he explains the reason for it existing and then even reasons against it, and he breaks basically both sides of the argument. He says the evidences that it does exist are weak. And he breaks them. He like proves them wrong, and he says the evidence for denying them, that because the philosophers, you say that by this logical argument it proves that juz'un la yatajazza cannot exist, and he would say that no, those are also weak. In fact, it can exist. Like this argument is not sound, and then he'd break down those arguments. But then eventually, I think around by the time of Imam Ghazali, it sort of fell out of favor because Imam Ghazali didn't use the juz'un la yatajazza as an argument for the existence of reality. He used the contingency argument, which is actually still used today. If you watch like Speaker's Corner, whether it's Muhammad Hijab, you even see a lot of like Salafi people who. It's weird. This is again going back to the Aqidah thing I mentioned at the beginning, that initially the whole thing of the Ahlul Hadith, of the Ahlul Athar, etc., was that they were against using debate and kalam, using logical argumentation to prove the deen. And then that changed over time. Ibn Taymiyyah rahmatullahi and so on. Anyway, so it's interesting now. Most of the people, not most, but a lot of the people who you will likely have seen using this argument, the contingency argument, are actually Salafis. But Imam Ghazali is sort of like the pioneer, you could say, of that sort of thinking. At least in the Islamic world, he spread that a lot. Even in the non-Muslims, there was a Christian guy, I can't remember right now off the top of my head. Maybe Thomas Aquinas, maybe some other guy who started who used the contingency argument and spread it. But anyway, that's again for another day. So when the contingency argument came up then and became ra'ij, became commonplace, then people stopped focusing so much on juz'un la yatajazza, and eventually it became not really as relevant, even though people still discuss it. If you go and pick up a mantiq book, a book of logic or a book of falsafa nowadays, that's again obviously if you're studying these sciences, then they will discuss juz'un la yatajazza. And then there's also like there's a lot of interesting debates. So just tell me, what have you heard about it? Have you heard about it before? Does it make sense? What do you think there's such a thing as a particle which cannot be separated? Is it necessary for it to exist, or do the falasifa make more sense that there's no such thing as juz'un la yatajazza? To be honest, I feel like, from my perspective, juz'un la yatajazza, the idea that it's necessary for juz'un la yatajazza to exist, I don't necessarily agree with it, but I don't also think that juz'un la yatajazza doesn't exist. I think both arguments. I say I'm on Imam Razi's maslak. I say just tawaqquf, just chill, and we'll see. Allah knows best. It's not a relevant thing to argue about anymore.